Work sucks when it's harder than it has to be. It's even worse when we're the ones making it harder. As creatives, we resist structure. It's confining, it's corporate, it's boring. It'll also blow up your career in the best way possible. Just ask Dan Nelken, today's guest on the DesuckifyWork Podcast. Dan is a best-selling author, has over 40,000 LinkedIn followers, and has created courses, talks, and workshops that have impacted nearly every corner of our industry. If you told 5 years ago, Dan, that he would be doing all of this right now, he'd probably laugh at you. But today, Dan is doing what he's doing because he did a whole bunch of research and learned these life-changing lessons. Structure isn't cheating. It's freeing. It allows you to focus on the work versus how you do the work. Structure provides confidence, giving you multiple starting points to fill up the dreaded blank page fast. Structure is used by almost all top creatives, including Jason Bagley, who rose to ECD at a little shop called Wieden Kennedy and now runs the Audacious School of Astonishing Pursuits, helping other ad folks learn the magical power of process. During the show, we also dive into the need for better leadership and more professional development opportunities in advertising. We talk about the importance of having your own personal creative projects, and we explore some of Dan's favorite headline techniques like the list and twist, the smile, and the mullet. If you're nice, I'll share some pictures of my own mullet from back in high school. It was pretty epic. Dan's pretty epic himself, so let's take a listen. All right, Dan Nelken, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast.
Yes, love the name, TJ. Great to chat to you.
Yeah, great to have you on. I think we'll get into good stuff. I know you've had an interesting journey here over the last handful of years, so it'll be fun to dive into that. And I'm sure a lot of this audience probably at least knows of you, if not knows you, or knows you through some of the work you're doing lately. But for those who don't, can you give us a quick overview of what you're currently doing and how you came to be doing it?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that anyone knows me. That's still like hard for me to wrap my head around.
Get it?
So yeah, I've been worked in ad agencies. I'm in Vancouver, Canada. It's kind of where I started my career. And then I started freelancing. And for a lot of that time, I think like a lot of creative people was always like, I want to create more for myself, or I love being creative. I just didn't know where to put it. And I found advertising. So all along, I was like, come up with ideas and not do anything. And so over the course of, it took me about 8 years, but I had a rough draft of a book, just the book and the help I always needed. So I wasn't an expert in the industry. Obviously, I wasn't known by anyone. And so I didn't try and be one. It was like, this just would have helped me. And I started sharing bits of it on LinkedIn 3.5 years ago, something like that. Maybe 4, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it was about 3.5 years ago. And that content resonated with other people. And so I had built an audience. By the time the book came out, turns out the book was actually good. And so this thing took off. It was like number 2 on Amazon, in the UK, the US, Canada, Australia.
Wow.
So then, yeah, people started reaching out, podcasts. I'm starting to speak to, the biggest brands in the world and agencies. I'm going to Lisbon and London soon.
Oh,
and
nice.
It's all just from starting to share and creating for myself. So I guess that's how I got here. I'm still learning, to accept. It's funny the way I'm being perceived, because as a self-doubting, creative for a lot of my career.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't write it because I was an expert. I'm like, this really would have helped me. I wish someone put these pieces together like this.
Yeah.
And then people call you an expert. You're like, hang on, no, I'm not. And then you realize, oh, yeah. So I've made a course now, and I just keep building, and I want to just keep making more things, not all of them in the educational space, but using the skills that I've learned working for ad agencies and putting them to my own things.
Yeah. I think it's interesting when you talk about this idea of people view you as an expert. It makes me wonder if most experts are in the same boat, meaning people create things. And I've heard this kind of line before. It's like, this is a thing I would have needed, or this is a thing I even kind of still need. And I just needed to take my jumbled thoughts and put them down on paper in an orderly way so that now I had a reference for it. And then you become the expert, because very few people do that. Even though we all have the thoughts, taking that time to kind of systematically put them out in chapter by chapter form is where the difference happens. So I think you become an expert simply by becoming somebody who creates a thing that you need, and therefore probably others like you need.
Yeah, because I realize, well, I am an expert. I always have been. Like, I'm an expert in being myself and knowing what I know.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And so, the beauty is that usually if somebody needs to know something, and somebody else needs to know it too. And I think that's one of the things in advertising that we're not always great at, which is sort of the sharing of the wealth of knowledge and the training and the development, which I think we can get into as we dive in here a little bit more. One thing I like to ask before we go too deep into the specifics of stuff is, what role does work play in your life? You have kind of an interesting work setup now. So where does it fit into the rest of your life?
I mean, it's a good question. It's changed. Like, it's not all consuming, or maybe that's not true. I think what's changed is I enjoy it more. It's still a struggle, like a grind, but there's more joy in it now. Like, I found before, just working for agencies, like, it was a grind, and there'd be like a small period, maybe in between projects, maybe it was like a day, maybe a weekend, where you'd feel like, I did something, and then it was back into it. But it kind of felt a little like on a hamster wheel, like, not growing, or didn't notice I was growing, and it just felt like the same. And I feel like it's different now. So, like, it's a grind, it's uncomfortable, I get nervous, but like talking to you now, I'm not that nervous. My first podcast, I was. And so there's an excitement and a fear around these things, and then that kind of goes away, or just gets bigger and bigger, and then I'm being flown to speak, and I'm terrified of that. And then I do that. So it's a different kind of stress that has a more noticeable reward. It's like I'm more quickly realizing some of my potential than I was before. And I feel a bit more free, because I guess I'm creating more for me.
Yeah. Which totally makes sense. I mean, the notion of creating for ourselves, I think regardless of whether your plan is to stay in agencies, right up until they finally boot you out when you have too many gray hairs or whatever, or you want to ultimately just be somebody who creates for themselves for a living, doing something for yourself is important. I think it can be anything. I mean, I've done cat Instagram posts over the years and things like that. Like, I was still working full time, but it was really a good outlet for me. And by the way, it also made me better at like writing lines, because I was writing a dozen plus lines every night, maybe even more, to get to the one line I used. So, it actually becomes practice that can help you bring it back into your creative work.
Because you get to experience what it's like to create without the pressure, without the layers of approval, without trying to get into other people's heads, thinking what would they like versus what would I like. And when you create for yourself, you get closer to that. Like, it doesn't matter if it goes viral, if it does well, it does make you a better creative. And for me, it also removes some of the stress that I would feel with the rejection and frustration at work. It's like, okay, well, my happy place is here. And when it happens at work, well, that's a bonus and even better.
Yeah. It makes me wonder about, because you started to describe when you strip away some of the stress of the judgment that may come in an agency setting, you really figure out what you want and what your, to use a term that maybe is overused, but I like it anyway, is you find your voice, basically. You kind of know who you are as a creative. And what I wonder for agencies and to be the best agency, and I think some of the better ones do this well, how do you get as much of that to show up at your door every day? Meaning, if you walked into an agency and took an agency job today, I want you to write like Dan. Like I want you to bring all of that stuff, all of the skills, all of the ability to come up with interesting and cool headlines and different kinds of copy. Like I want that. And how do you set the parameters within an agency to get more of that, so that ultimately maybe more people could show up at an agency and not only do great work and better work, but feel a little more of the fulfillment that's maybe been lacking. I hear it from you. I've felt it at times. I'm hearing a lot of creatives feel that. So that it's like, I get to bring me and all my creative goodness into an agency, and it's valued and wanted. Do you think that's possible, or am I smoking a pipe dream there?
I think it can happen when stars align for you. Like,
yeah,
you're at the right agency with the right team, working for the right client at the right time.
Yeah.
Like that's really what it takes. My best work has been done with a client who was pushing us creatively, just the same, they wanted it. And talking to someone like Jason Bagley, who was the ECD at Wieden Kennedy, it seems like what they did in their heyday, I don't know about now, but they wanted to find the right fit for the creatives to like be their crazy selves and bring themselves into the work. And I think that's why they did such great work.
Yeah.
They were just being ridiculous, creating ridiculous brands, if that's whether it was Old Spice or KFC. And then the agency attracted brands who wanted that kind of work. So you attract a certain type of creative, a specific type, and you allow them to be themselves. And you have clients who want the same thing. And that's rare, because most agencies, when they start out, if they start out small, they have a clear soul, maybe, and a passion, and then they grow and they need this business to keep the lights on, and they just become yes people, and it changes as they grow. It's hard to keep that soul as you grow, I think. And
I think rare. It can be. I wonder if agencies are not doing the sort of quote unquote internal work. When I work with coaching clients, the problems may appear out there, but the solutions are mostly in here in terms of like figuring out who you are, what you want, and then trying to go get it. And I think for agencies, they either lose sight of who they are, maybe they never knew who they were, they don't care. But I think a lot, if they just spent a little time thinking about like, who do we want to be as an agency, you might at least do your best to evolve in that way, and therefore try to attract the kind of clients that do that, and therefore have the ability, when you bring in creative talent, to think, okay, where is this person's ability best going to align? Which clients do I think? Because I think we don't always think that way. Like you show up into an agency and it's just like, all right, like you're up, and there's this project and you should work on it because you're a senior copywriter that goes do the thing, as opposed to like really thinking like, okay, this is a project from kind of a more B2B corporate brand, and there's two people here who are great at that and actually like it, like and trying to carve out that space. It's hard. I mean, it's a complicated game, but it's a game I think that pays off if you at least try to do it.
It's true, because as you're talking, I'm thinking like, what if we represented ad agencies as like packaged goods on a shelf, and they were all beside each other?
Yeah.
They'd all have the same ingredients. They'd have the same benefits. They all say that their, advantage is creativity or disruption. We're disruptive. Yeah. Everyone's disruptive. Nobody's disruptive. You all look the same.
Yeah.
So there's very few that would stand out on a shelf.
Yeah, it's interesting and almost ironic in a business that is so steeped in this idea of creativity, that when it comes to how we think about the agency and how it operates and what it stands for, it is remarkable how like, yeah, if you just stripped those names off and you just said, go in here and tell me what agency you're at.
Yeah, I'll share this as
I
like
don't know.
maybe we'll get a little self-serving.
Mm-hmm.
But I met with, but just when it comes to like creative professional development, which is a
Mm-hmm.
term I think I made up, which says
Which
something,
is a little
right?
sad. Yes.
It is sad.
Yeah.
I have a lot of individuals from ad agencies, the top ad agencies around the world, who have taken my course.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of companies who have hired me to speak,
Yeah.
it's all been, not all, but let's just say it's 20 so far. It's like 2 or 3 agencies. The rest have been brands.
Mm.
And I just met with a big brand that has built an in-house team.
Mm-hmm.
And they now do 100% of their work, just not PR, 100% of their work from TV to digital ads. Wow. Internally with this, and made from a lot of ad agency folk. And
Yeah.
she said, I mean, to quote this person, she said she hates working with ad agencies.
Mm.
And, you know, one thing, and then some of it's probably like she can generalize because her experiences has been the same.
Sure.
And I know when I worked internally at Lululemon, it was like when you work for an ad agency for a long time, creativity is king. Creativity is your product.
Yeah.
When you work for Lululemon, pants is their product.
Yeah.
And it's not always aligned. And so I think that's what some of them feel. They're not like great partners.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this company is going to bring me in to speak because a company like that is used to having professional development for other parts of their organization.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I just don't know why ad agencies aren't like
I don't know,
taking that initiative. If it's time, if they don't need it because they're already experts, I'm just not sure. It's just culturally, and I'm generally speaking, but from my experience so far, it seems culturally, it's just not something the industry is valuing, or it's just not on the radar.
I think that's maybe a big part of it, is that culturally, in many ways, I mean, I think about when I was coming up in the business, there was a little bit of a, either you can make it or you can't. Either you know, like, and that sort of fostered like the work speaks for itself, and you do the work and you get better at the work, or you don't. You know, and you learn by sort of brute force of like trying to crack a brief. And it was like, you know, a little Lord of the Flies. It was a little like, you know, just get in there. It's going to be awful and crazy, but somehow you learn through that process. And I think that lingers, even though I don't think the cultures look and feel like that quite as much these days. I think that spirit, particularly in the creative department, is still there, so that the idea that you should have somebody like you walk in and show people, here's like 10 great different ways that you could write a headline. It's like, damn it, you should know that already, is kind of the mindset. Whereas a brand is going to go, I don't know how to write a headline. I haven't been steeped in this culture that sort of says like sort of a survival of the fittest, you know, rules. So therefore, of course I'd want it. And to your point, they have a pretty robust professional development thing going on throughout the rest of the business, which I'm not sure advertising does in the rest of the business either. I think maybe it's a little more on places like accountant strategy, but not a lot more. And I think the economic model of advertising agencies is also at play here, right? I don't even pretend to fully understand it, other than it appears like there's some kind of voodoo that goes on just to simply actually make like more than a 1% profit, because we give away a lot. We charge in weird ways per head count and all this weird stuff. We don't keep the IP of the work we create. There's so much stuff that's like a little bizarre in agencies that then lets them go, I don't have any money for professional development. And it's obviously short-sighted. But how do you get out of that cycle? You know, I'm not sure. I mean, when you try to share what you offer to agencies, and a few have apparently bought into it, the ones that have, I mean, what got them to say, yes, we need this?
You know, it's funny, this agency I'm going to speak to in Lisbon,
Mm-hmm.
one of the founders read my book recently,
Mm.
mentioned it to her partner, who said, I took that guy's course.
Mm.
Their head of strategy had taken my course as well, which is crazy to me.
Mm-hmm.
That only 800 people have taken the course, and two
Yeah.
from the small company in Lisbon. The book doesn't surprise me as much anymore. It's like kind of going around.
Mm-hmm.
So then they do, which is, and it's super rare. This company, I'm going to shout them out. They're called Between Collective,
Mm.
and they're fully remote. But every year they bring their entire team, and that's flying people in
Mm-hmm.
for a week together, and it's all professional development.
Ooh.
And the founders normally guide this. And this
Mm-hmm.
year they thought, well, what about bringing someone in? And
Mm-hmm.
I just happened to come up because by coincidence they had all had some experience with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know they're bringing in a couple, at least one other locally based person to talk with the team.
Yeah.
So yeah, they clearly value
Mm-hmm.
professional development.
Yeah.
Others, it's been like one creative will reach out, and then I'll say, or I've mentioned group rates, and one writer, and I will help them try and convince. Or sometimes it is a creative director who reaches out and has just said, hey, they've noticed that I would offer a group rate on the course or doing these talks. But yeah, it's mostly been brands for sure.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a little bit of like feeling threatened, meaning if I'm an ECD at an agency and I say, I'm going to hire this guy to teach my team how to think more creatively, write headlines under pressure, all that good stuff. What does that say about me as an ECD? And so I think the more enlightened ECD will go, this is wonderful. I'm bringing more learning to my team, and I can help continue to support that learning as we go. But for a lot, our egos get involved, and our career sort of almost feels like it hangs in the balance of like, if I need some help, am I somehow
maybe
insufficient in some way?
I think there's also a belief, and it's the reason why it was kind of the sink or swim when we started, a belief that you can't teach creativity, that you either have this magical gift or you don't.
Yeah.
And then sometimes when I talk about structure and creativity, I will get pushback from some of those people who are like, no, I can think of lots of examples where I've received pushback, but because I'm thinking about this, I have a counter usually and can get them to think a little bit differently about it. And how structure, I believe, is the key. That's interesting.
The word structure is something that I get the resistance to, because just inherently, as I think creatives, like that word means something that is not good. And when you talk about structure, I think you say basically like you have some kind of process. You just maybe haven't figured out how to articulate it and put it down. What are the benefits of having some structure or process to the way you work, and what are we missing when we don't have it or we haven't articulated it?
Well, I feel like it's harder to have confidence when you don't know how you do what you do. Every time you get a brief, it feels like you are winging the creative process, and you hope that ideas come out of your brain and fill up this blank page. But you don't know if it's going to happen. This could be the time where nothing happens.
Yeah.
Well, when you have structure and you know how you do what you do, and even in terms of structure, when you know when you do how you do what you do, like what is the best time? Know your own creative rhythms. Know how long a creative session should be. Know when to stop. Know what to do on a break. Like being a finely tuned athlete, like they're amazing if you look at them, and then you look at creatives who just like show up and wing the day and hope it happens. We can't control when meetings are. We just go. And so often we work evenings, and then creatives will tell themselves they work better at night. I wonder how much of that is your work is just not set up for you to be productive in the daytime. Like we just know so little about how our brain works, when our brains work. And so structure, I've started breaking down like ads and saving ads for years now. I've done it. And I put them into this swipe folder. Anything that I like, it's mostly been writing based. It started looking for references for the book. And I noticed patterns. So I just started naming the techniques. So I see these, they're winning awards all over. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a list and twist. That's a smile headline. That's a mullet. That's a this. So I have tons of them. And I have hundreds of examples for each one from all the top brands in the world. And I guarantee you, all of them, nobody said, well, I'm going to write list and twist headline. And this is going to but I can do that. I can break down a structure. And even I have a structure that comes way before that. If I have time, which nobody has anymore, we have less and less of, I can wing it, and I still do.
Yeah.
But when I'm feeling doubt, when the clock is ticking, all of a sudden I've got all of these tricks. And the crazy thing is I was doing them anyway. I just didn't know I was doing them. So it just makes it more deliberate. This is how you get creative speed and confidence. I'm in a room with 5 other writers, and creative director says, write as many lines as you can in the next 30 minutes. I'm winning that contest most times. Like, now, I wouldn't before. That was like the worst thing ever for me. And I still would get the bad feeling, but I know I would have an advantage over lots of people now because I have a structure.
Yeah. It's interesting as you say that. I think maybe some of the resistance is that it almost feels like cheating to somebody. It's like, now I have a technique or a process. Like before, it was the magic of my brain, and it would just like, these things would come out. Do I lose a sense of my specialness as a creative if I'm referring to the way I work through these lenses of, I mean, I love the names, the list and twist, the mullet. I mean, as soon as you've put these out there on LinkedIn, like, not only are they good names, but it's like, oh yeah, I know that technique. I've used that technique. But there's something in the story we get to tell ourselves. If I just come up with a good line that's kind of, the straight lead and then the funny punch or the funny whatever, and you're going to call that the mullet or whatever. Like, do I get to feel better about myself because I yank that out of my subconscious, as opposed to, I'm going to come up with 50 mullet headlines right now.
Well, I've like come up with that actually. So there's another one that we all use. Most of us don't call on it by name. If people do, they call it like juxtapositions, which I just call it opposites because it's easier to remember. And a good name, you want to like call on it quickly. And so that's just when you use like, opposites in the language. So less, more, less of this, more of that. It's such a common headline. Even more common, you'll see people doing the hello, goodbye thing. So Thomas Kennedy wrote about this technique in his book, Junior. And I recently, just as an experiment, said, using only one technique, opposites, I'm going to write 100 headlines to promote my course. And then I'm going to put myself in a smaller box, and I'm going to start by only using less, more combinations. So feels predictable, feels like cheating, but I got to about 30 lines, half of them decent. And I played with that. So it wasn't all just like 4-word sentences, less stress lines, more headlines. Like I got to a bunch, and then I opened it up. But by the time I got well past 100. You couldn't even recognize the technique. I wrote your deadline, lifeline, dead and life, kind of inspired, but it's not as formulaic, but it just gives you somewhere to start. And so it takes so much pressure off. When you think about sitcoms and series, they have like 3-act structures, they have defined characters. You just don't know what's going to come out of their mouth. Like if they didn't have any of that, and every episode, every week, they were like, oh my God, what are we going to do? What's the show going to be about? We need who are the characters? Like this is what we do every time. What's the name of the show? Who are the characters? Who's going to direct it? Like structure, it does feel bad. And then when you get to techniques, it does feel like cheating. These are things we have to overcome, because feeling a little bad for having structure because it's counterintuitive, and feeling like you're cheating even when you're not, is better than not having a job.
Yeah. Yeah. And better than like you said, feeling like, do I even know how to do this job every time you get a
Yeah.
new brief? Because I think any creative has felt that. And all the way up to like, you can be the top creative in an agency and still be like, oh shit, this might be the brief. Or I
Yeah.
just draw a complete blank. And I think you're cluing into something interesting, which is, one of the things people always say, like, it's like, take that first step, just start moving, start doing. And you can stay up here for a long time, but there is something beautiful about when you take that first step, do that first thing, write that first headline, write the first 20 headlines using the list and twist technique or whatever. That, like you said, now you might do another 100 using that technique, but at some point your brain has now, you've kind of cracked the code on how to get your brain just doing the thing and finding its pieces 100%. And connecting the dots.
100%. You're not limited to it. Like,
right.
You go off. It helps me organize things, helps me when I'm stuck. Of course, it still feels great to like not do any of those techniques. And I do. Or if I'm walking the dog and I have my phone open, I'm like, oh, that's a funny thought.
Yeah.
I'm not going, oh, opposite mullet. What's a good mullet? I will sometimes write them down. So I'm like, I'm stuck. What technique can I try? But I also have a list of insights around whatever product that is. So I can go into different ways in and come up with ideas. And then I'll notice, oh yeah, that's a whatever. And this is a whatever. But I'm not like, if I'm coming up with deliberately a certain technique and I come up with a better line that isn't any technique I know, I don't throw it out,
Damn
I'm like,
that wasn't a mullet.
Yeah, damn, I can't use this. No, I think if all you did was send like a bunch of less more headlines, your boss would be odd to you pretty quickly and say with your client, like, you can't do that.
Right.
But I could, in my batch of headlines, have 2 or 3 for sure.
Yeah. I think it's it in some ways what you're doing, I feel like it democratizes the creative process because it invites anybody to take a shot, right? Try using this, try using this, try using this. And then, some people will inherently get better than others because of a million different reasons. And some folks will develop different styles and different twists on all of that stuff. But there's no reason to sort of gatekeep it, which I think may be part of this too, is like, you can't come into the club. Like if you just have this list of stuff, like you're not special like me. So I think there could be some of that going in. I will say I've worked on freelance projects and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to pull Dan's book off the shelf, and I've used and it does work in all the ways we're talking about. It takes the blank page away. All right. I'm going to do 10 less more headlines. And I might not like any of them, but now my brain's open, maybe when I go back, I go, actually, that one's pretty good. I'm actually going to submit that one. And so I think there's a ton of value in it. And I think certainly I'm not shocked in any way that your book has been successful, because it does invite people into this process in a way that just strips that mystique away from it and makes it like, oh, I can do this. And now I can spend my time working on getting better at it and bringing myself into it and finding my own ways of twisting where he had me start. You know what I mean? I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I think I did have in my mind, like in writing the book, this wasn't for ad people. It was for people.
Yeah.
And I happen to work in advertising, and it was like empathetic, like because I wrote it to myself. It's a self-help guide for copywriters.
Yeah.
I was the person I was helping, and it shows you, like to your point earlier too, when you share something, like your own truth, people can relate. If you try to be an expert, or I think too often in advertising, like we limit ourselves by thinking about other ads, thinking about just our little industry. And so that book was like, the number one target was probably people who work in advertising, but it wasn't exclusively that. I did have, I wanted it to be more, I guess, inclusive, what you're saying. Like,
I think it is. And I think it's wonderful. And I think another thing that you've done, which is a very simple thing, but I think it's like, again, it invites people in. You have this line, your headline on LinkedIn. It's just your inner critic is a ding dong. And you sign off. I think you do PS, your inner critic is a ding dong or whatever. And
Yeah.
like, it's one of those lines, like, first of all, it's funny. I mean, it's just like ding dong is a funny word for a funny phrase. And like, but this idea, everybody has an inner critic. So it's very relatable. But it one, when I hear your inner critic as a ding dong, I hear a little bit of you admitting that you feel the same way.
For sure. Yeah.
So how did you get to this place where you like came up with this line? Because I think like it's very, as I said, inviting, but on some level, was there any fear in kind of admitting that fear?
I mean, I really kind of did in the book. That line came later after I shared on LinkedIn. And I will say that line I cannot trace to any technique. So they do come out. I wanted to be helpful with that line. A lot of people, that was kind of it, use that line to talk about themselves. I help, especially influencers. I help this target 10x there, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Or they just talk about themselves. So I'm like, how could I give something in that line? So that's why I chose to do that.
Yeah.
And then, is also a big part of me. I think that's a big part of the book. And the one thing that maybe separates it from other books is talking about self-doubt. And we all deal with it. And like you said earlier, nobody talks about it. We all just have this thing going on in our heads every brief. It's like, why not talk about it? Like, why? Yes, we all have it, but talking about it would help so much.
Yeah.
And so for me, again, it's just what I needed. And it's easier for me to say it now that I've developed a bit of an audience. I do still feel that way. It makes me more mindful of it when I come up against things that I'm afraid of, or, I'm doing my first webinar on September 4th. That terrifies me. Like, there's so much, but that line is a reminder for me too, to be like, it's always going to feel hard to do new things.
Yeah.
Our brains don't like it when anything is unresolved. And
is that enough to know that, or is there anything more that helps you move through the ding dong voice in your head to get to a place where, like, I'm still going to do this thing?
Well, I needed other things in life for sure. I think getting older and not creating enough for myself was a huge motivator.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to be that person who was full of shit. Finding out that my wife was pregnant, it was a surprise. And I had this book, this rough draft of this book. And I thought, well, I guess this gives me another 5 years till my daughter's in kindergarten.
Yeah.
And then I wrote a note to my daughter then. I mean, she was, I don't know, she wasn't born 6 months from being born. And I just said, I'm never going to be able to give you what you've already given me, because I promised myself that I was going to just start taking action and finish that book. So I think, even after the book, I remember a distinct moment with the course. So I pre-sold the course that I made, and I had never made a course. So, you have to learn microphone technique, lighting, which if you watch it, I clearly didn't learn. I've updated it, but there's some videos that are still from that point. I remember the first video, recording it. I was probably about 4 or 5 hours in, and I couldn't get this first video done. That was about 5 minutes long. And I think in the past, if I hadn't pre-sold this course, I would have just stopped and found a reason why it just wasn't the right time, and I would have bought this excuse. But really deep down, I would know that I was a chicken shit.
Yeah.
But I never did all that time, or maybe it was just buried until I was like, no, you're finishing this. And by the time you're done, you're going to be so good at this. And I just was like, and with the book, I had to finish. I was like, just find out what's on the other side. And every time, even 2 months before I hit publish, I was going to like pull the plug on the thing. I was like, no, just get to the end. That's why it took me 8 years, because I kept stopping. And then, I'd get busy with a contract and come back to it and probably get to an uncomfortable spot, make up an excuse, go on. And then I just kind of getting older. I don't want to be the person who's full of shit. I was like, just go get a job and quit freelancing. Go get some benefits, the family, and
sure,
or finish something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's changing my life.
Yeah.
And now I just want to do more of that. It's still hard, but as we talked about earlier, the payoff is greater. It's a different kind of hard,
Yeah,
a much more rewarding payoff.
I can imagine, and I've certainly experienced a bit of that myself. But I think what you're demonstrating also there is it is just a very limp muscle inherently. The idea of finishing shit without any external pressure, right? You show up at an agency and they say, "Well, finish this by Tuesday." Well, you finish it by Tuesday because that's how it is. But you say, "I'm going to write a book," and you say, "I'm going to finish it by next year." It's just your voices, and again, the inner critic is going to show up and go, "This isn't really that good. Who needs this?" Blah 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 blah. And so you have to find some way of just saying, "I'm going to do it just to say I did the thing and finish the thing, and I want to know what that feels like." That's it's not as pressing of a motivation, but once you did that once, the next time you had to do it, it was probably a little bit easier. Now that muscle had a little something to it, and then you finished another thing, and then occasionally you pull out your bag of tricks and you go, "Yeah, I'm going to pre-sell this course, so damn well better finish it." But again, the muscles get more, but it's never like easy. It's just more like, "Oh, I remember how to do this," and the motions can start happening. How do you, if somebody was showing up one of your talks or something, and they asked a question, something along the lines of, "I've got this project I want to do and I keep putting it off, and I can't find the motivation." Like, do you have any thoughts on what can help people find it other than kind of just shut your inner voice? Or is there anything else that can help you realize that there's so much benefit to finally getting over that finish line?
I mean, I can only speak for myself. I don't know if this is good advice or not, but what worked for me was like feeling the pain and frustration of certain things. So I remember when I was close on the book, I took a contract with a company I won't name. And I said, "I hope this is the worst one yet." Like, because I was like, feel this pain and frustration. Like, it's real. We bury it because we don't have an alternative. And we accept that this is just what life is like. But once you go like, no, I don't like this for a reason. We're all looking for a sign in life or signs. We expect the signs to feel like really good and be a bright, colorful light. But I think we get signs all the time. They're just bad feelings. Things where people we're jealous of, and we should be proud of their success. That's a sign you want to do something. Something you're fearful of, frustrated with a client at work. That says you don't want to do that type of work and work with the people with those creative sensibilities. Like, but we just keep accepting it as opposed to going, "Well, how do I change this?" And it's really allowing yourself to feel that and dial it up. And then, so I did that. And then I had this other thing going. If you don't do this, you're full of shit and you're a loser, kind of. But I didn't want to accept that. Because I had all these ideas and I'd done so much work on this book. Like, you're just going to abandon this too? And I just was like, no. I got so determined that no matter what, I'm finishing it. And I did not care if I sold 3 books. I think that helped because it was about finishing it. It also helped me stay true to because I didn't have expectations. Like, I think that made it more helpful. Because it didn't come from a place of like, what would a successful book read like or feel like? It was like, what would the book I always needed feel like? And just finish it. And that was it.
I see a lot of value in that. I mean, a few things there. One, that last part, letting it just be a thing that is true to you. And you're not holding it up against anything else. But I actually think your bit of advice that you weren't sure if it was good advice, I think there's something to that. I think being better at reading what our body and mind is trying to tell us through the bad feelings we can get, like, that's valuable. I mean, even the thing that your point about like, oh, I'm jealous about this thing that somebody posted or whatever. Like, I felt that, I feel that at times, but I also believe what you said. Like, that's telling me that I want to do a thing, and therefore I should do a thing if I don't want that feeling anymore, rather than shifting my feelings towards this other person for some reason and somehow making them the enemy, which is just weird and bizarre.
Totally.
I love this,
which is why we bury it.
Yeah, and then you don't want those feelings, right? And I think we're very good at some combination of tolerating pain and burying pain versus dealing with the frustration of creation. Like that pain is, I guess, maybe just, again, unfamiliar. We're used to the pain of feeling jealous, being frustrated by clients, hating a particular job or a particular project that I keep getting thrown on. That's familiar, but the pain of, I'm not sure if I know how to do this thing, and what does it even mean to be finished with writing a book? I've never finished a book. I don't know. How do I even know? That is so uncomfortable that we'll remarkably tolerate a lot of pain rather than listen to it.
Yeah, 1,000%.
Yeah. One of the things that you talk about as well, that I think you posted this recently, and it just struck with me. You said, it might have been from somebody else, a quote, "Who am I without my ideas? Your ideas are not you." That was it. Your ideas are not you. And my first reaction was like, well, then who the hell am I without my ideas? Because it's like, I think as creatives, that is glued together for us. So who are we if we're not our ideas? How do you separate the ideas from the being and that identity as somebody who is, quote unquote, a creative?
Well, I think I shared that in the context of feedback.
Yeah.
Because people will review work and you know what you like, but if someone else doesn't, or if it's not a fit, we'll often take that personally.
Yeah.
But the only part we can control is the creative process, coming up with ideas, because they might be amazing. And we can't control anything after that unless it's for yourself. But in ad agency land, or working for a brand or any marketing company or a content machine, we spend most of our time coming up with ideas. And then we think about the stuff that's made, the small percentage of stuff that gets made. And of that, what percentage of it are you super proud of? And it gets harder the longer you go in this career, because you have to, it has to beat everything you've done to make it on your, on your list, wall, on your list. So I think you are your process. And if you don't have structure, your process is chaotic.
Yeah. It's an interesting twist, the idea that we can be our process and be confident in the fact that we have a process, and we know I'm always going to be able to come up with more ideas because I have a way of doing this that allows me to get to stuff that I can start to feel good about. And maybe that is in fact why we attach ourselves to our ideas, because we're not confident that we can come up with ones that are of the same quality.
I think so. And I know for myself, when I would be stuck or, having self-doubt, like I wouldn't come up with anything.
Yeah.
And then when I did, it would feel so good. It would be such a relief. But I think oftentimes that stopped me from pushing to great, because I was like, oh my God, this is not embarrassing, or whatever the level was. But to keep going because you enjoy the process and you have time. I'm going to add this too. I mentioned Jason Bagley earlier, and I took his creative mega machine course, and I was shocked to learn that all of the top guys, including Jason, have structure. They have actual creative prompts that they use. They're writing a headline or anything else. It's a list of, each one has their own.
Yeah.
So these are some of the most prolific, most awarded creatives in the world doing that. And I'm glad that he's sharing that now, because I assumed from the outside, well, these were creative wizards
right
over there. I did not have that.
I think a lot of folks assume that, right? I think, particularly when you have that kind of success and you're working at an agency like Wieden. I think people think, oh, they must just be different than me. They're wired different. They've got some gift. And listen, they may have some gifts, of course, but it is reassuring to hear that they have a way of activating their gifts. And that, I think, is, going back to the idea that's not cheating. I think a better way of framing it is that it's actually like the most generous thing you can do is to find ways of activating those gifts in the best way possible so that you show up and bring the most of yourself as possible. Because otherwise, it is chaotic. And some days you're not going to show up with your best, just because you didn't want to use some prompt or some technique. It ends up becoming a bit of a selfish act if I really think about it, that I'm not opening myself up in that way.
Yeah, and don't worry, you'll still have self-doubt. It doesn't go away.
Exactly. You can still carry that friend around with you.
Yes. Yeah. I think of, the more we talk about this, I'm a big fan of Jerry Seinfeld and like his process in particular. And on the Tim Ferriss podcast, he was interviewed and he gets into it. It actually wasn't a funny podcast, but he has the chain where he writes every single day and doesn't break that chain.
Yeah.
So he has... that's also structure. Like, this is how he does it. And even if it's not a productive day, he knows he's dedicated this window to ideas, insights, truths, jokes. So he's not like winging it and going, well, when it comes to me, or I'll stay up late. Like, no, this is when I do it. I take it very serious.
Yeah. I'm not working until the pizza shows up at 10 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's funny. I've heard Seinfeld, and certainly I think he's actually one of the more open people about having a process. And so I think paying attention to folks like that, people who are at the top, somebody like that, or in our own industry, somebody like Jason Bagley or somebody like that, who's like achieved everything that anybody in the creative side of our business would ever want to achieve. And yet he has a process, and he's now sharing so much of that in a similar way that you are. And I think there's so much value in anybody who's open to sharing a little bit of like, this is what helps me. If it helps you, that's fantastic. If it helps you a little bit and then it helps you realize I actually work differently, great. But it helped you figure that out. So I think there's so much value in that versus trying to carry on this mystique that, I created that commercial because I am some kind of wizard or something. I don't think that's ultimately helping anybody. And in an industry where professional development is, fairly non-existent, the more people can be sharing what they know and what's helped them along the way, it's at least a start. And then if you can tell me that if guys like you and Jason start really getting invited into a lot of agencies to help people, then I'd start to go, wow, we're making real progress, because that's I think needed, even if there's some fear around it,
Because here's the thing, like, people who take my course or aren't in advertising creative, and will read something, one of the techniques, they'll just do it and think that's a good ad. But the more talented you are as a creative, you'll know what's good and what isn't, and you'll know this is just a starting point. So it's like a tool, like anything. Yeah. Give me a hammer and I can't build anything, but give the right person a hammer, they can do something with it. Yeah. And this is the other thing with sharing. Like, I get so much feedback from creatives at all levels. What helped, what didn't. It would be great if you did this, and can update it. Like, I think it helps with me not being aligned with any one particular agency, being able to do this, that I can put things together and take feedback. And it's been awesome from, it's not all writers, from designers, art directors, juniors, students, ECDs, partners, like, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I think the beauty of what you're doing is, that it's really more about the creative process. And I think, I know your book is the self-help guide for copywriters, but I think you've got is it your course, or is it, you call the self-help guide for creatives? Which is that?
That's the newsletter.
That's the newsletter, right? Because I think, you're speaking to people, anyone whether you're a designer, art director, creative, or if you're at home just trying to make something, maybe you're somebody who uses a hammer and a nail and stuff, but you're trying to create something interesting. There's value in understanding that there is some structure and process to it. There is a way to do things that is foundational. And then your skill and talent that you develop over time builds on that foundation. But that foundation is important and you're going to need it. Every time you go out to build a project, you need to know if I hammer a nail in this way, it's better than if I hammer it in this way, or whatever the thing is. Like there's just some basic fundamentals. So I really appreciate that. And I think, when it comes to this need for self-development and this need for creative confidence, I think what you're doing is allowing people to, one, admit to the lack of confidence, and then go, oh, but there's something I can do about it. One of the worst things, and if I come back to the DesuckifyWork thing, worst things that can happen at work is to feel incapable, to feel maybe even incompetent at times, right? And so what I see in the work that you're doing is you're giving people a bridge towards feeling capable and competent, and ultimately then being able to go to wherever they want to go in terms of greatness, right? Show up every day and go, I can do this, and I've got some ways of doing it. It feels a lot different than, I hope I can do it, So I think like you are desuckifying work in a really interesting and particular way with what you're doing.
Thank you. And I think it's that feeling, though, that stops people from creating for themselves. Like it was stopping me. It's like, because if you're not feeling valued at work, or like you're not good enough, and then you're going to write this book that you think this is my escape and will be more joyful, or whatever, you want to make a brand or launch your agency, and you get to a hard part and you start to feel that I'm not good enough. You're like, well, now I'm feeling it here too. I'm going to shut this down and go back, because at least I have some value over here. So it's a hard thing to push through that. But it's like anything, you have to do it, and you have to know how you do what you do.
Yeah, it makes me think about what you do in the sense of beyond the products that you create. There is the sort of ongoing presence you've created on LinkedIn, and this ability to create into that, meaning showing up and creating useful posts every week, or more than once a week. At some point, for a lot of folks, that itself is daunting, meaning like somebody wants to share something like that. And, this is, again, a little more on I'm creating it for myself, but I also want to share it to the world. That can be really, really daunting. What got you over the hump of that? Because I imagine it may have felt daunting to you at first as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the stuff we've talked about. It definitely did feel daunting. Didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
It's one thing I tell a lot of people is because I had, when I started creating, a rough draft of a book. And so I was like, I will just share a bit of that every Monday. And it will allow me to refine it every Monday, and I'll do it for a year. So it was once a week of something I had. So I tell a lot of people, I'm like, it's just like, you don't start when you have to write headlines. You don't start by writing headlines. You come up with ideas and insight that you can do it a lot quicker. If you start expecting fully baked headlines to jump out of your head, it's not going to go well. Or it'll take a lot longer. So it's the same with like posting. You can't just decide to post. So I tell people, if you haven't posted anything and you've been wanting to create more for yourself for years, you don't start with posting. Why don't you, what's another year? To spend 30 minutes every Friday coming up with ideas for what you would post about. Do that for a year. Put it in your calendar. Make it 15 minutes if that's too much, or 5. You can do a lot in 5 minutes. You can find 5 minutes to think about what you would post about. Would it be Instagram? Would it be LinkedIn? Would it, TikTok? And then by the end of the year, you'll have some ideas. You'll notice patterns. Some you like, some you don't. You can even do another 5 minutes where you're keeping track of the creators and content you like and don't like, and why. That could be a whole stream of content itself. And then a year or 2 years from now, start Make your first one. You've got all of this stuff to start with. Instead, we feel like, well, I have to start and I have to be on all these platforms. Like I was once a week short 200 to like 400 words.
Yeah.
But I had a major head start.
Yeah. And you had some structure as a result, right? I mean, I think you built the foundation, and then I think to your point, when you practice it, so to speak, you're building the practice before you do the thing, right?
Yeah.
So if you spend
you can't
a year,
do the thing if you don't have the habit.
Yeah.
That's more important.
Yeah,
so you're worried about success. I wrote this recently. It was like when I used to think about writing a screenplay, the only steps were like a great idea and accepting an Oscar. There's nothing in between, but it's like really hard. And so as soon as it got hard, I was like, oh, come on, this is what I was chasing.
You
have to be prepared for that and not let the things stop you because they're coming.
Yeah.
And you just gain in power with each one of those things that you overcome. It's like slaying your dragons. And you do it and it feels amazing. Yeah. And you save the prince.
Yeah. I love that. And I think for so many people, that process of doing it in a step-by-step way, and like you said, creating the habits, when the quote unquote pressure comes of putting that first post out, writing that first thing, whatever it is, it's a lot different than I have to do all of it at once. Now I'm used to the process. And now it's simply, okay, I feel pretty good about this one. Let me share that. Okay. And then, be a little prepared for, only 2 people liked it and 7 people saw it. Okay. Yeah. How different is that than yesterday when I did this and I didn't share it at all? Not much different. So let me just try it again and see where it goes from there. And maybe one person comments and you finally get a chance to go like, well, what's it like to respond to a comment on my own stuff? And how do I create conversation around that? And so there's all these incremental lessons and learnings that come throughout the process.
Even if you don't know what you want to do, you may never know exactly what you want to do. But like once you start and then maybe you're like, oh, I want to do this. Well, now you have all of these skills that you can apply to doing whatever that thing is, or that brand you launch. You have this momentum. Yeah. And don't think about like it's not the result is you posting.
Yeah.
Not the likes and follows. Like I still to this day will be like, if one person likes it other than me, it's a win.
Yeah. Yeah. I think appreciating the doneness of it. That's the muscle you want to build. Like, I keep doing things. And you forget that if you I only got X number of likes, your brain just shuts down. It's as if you didn't create the thing at all, because so then you might create 50 posts over the course of a year. And if you're so worried about the likes, I think you then think, what did I do? I didn't really do anything because I didn't get the likes I wanted, as opposed to I created 50 damn posts out of me. That's so giving ourselves a chance to recognize doing things and finishing things, coming back to, I think, your earlier point. Then when we try something that seems a little more daunting, remember when I did those 50 posts last year? Yeah, I can do a book, or I can do a short story, or I can do a painting, or I can do whatever the thing is you're creating. So I love that approach. One thing I want to touch on quick before we start wrapping up, because a lot of what you're talking about, if it's in the context of the advertising world, of the people showing up and feeling more confident in that space, it's important that we have good leaders to help people kind of be able to step into this space and learn and grow and develop and not get totally disheartened along the way. As creative leaders, I think it's important to help people, to nurture that confidence as it goes. And one of the things you do is CD talks, where you talk to and interview a lot of creative directors. It reminds me of the fact that nobody tells us how to become a creative director. We master all of these skills and we use the techniques and get to senior creative, maybe ACD, we're starting to lead a little bit. And then somebody says, bang, you're a creative director. Yeah. What do you do there? And have you learned anything? I think you've talked to 19 or so at this point. Is there any thread that you notice in terms of how people are able to shift the mindset of, I am a creator to now I am somebody who needs to nurture a team of creators and help them bring all of the good stuff that we've been talking about during the show into the work that they're doing.
I mean, I think a lot of them, the ones, and maybe it's how I'm picking them, but like there's a strong degree of empathy. So creatives, we can be so focused on the work, but I think the best ones are like really focused on people. So I think that's one of them. They recognize, I don't want to say creativity is second because it's like, it's so important.
Yeah.
But it's nothing without people. And so it's not having annual one-on-ones. Can you do it monthly? Can you do it weekly? Like, know what's going on for them. Know how can you make them succeed? It's going to make you look good.
Yeah.
I think one other thing is like to be a successful creative director or to create more for yourself is to not think like a creative all the time.
Yeah.
I think why we struggle to create for ourselves because we don't do all the other things very well. And in an agency, it's all set up, good or bad. I know what the deadline is. I know what the message is, whether I agree with it or not. It's all laid out. So, and what I mean by not thinking like a creative, and at least in ad land, is learn the business side of the business. Like creatives are almost seen as like the kids in the agency, the crazy kids with no structure and can wear whatever they want to work. And we don't talk to clients and we're just so like babied. But like, don't learn how to read. It was like one of the interviews was Katie Ainsworth. And she said, don't let your inability to read a spreadsheet limit your success as a creative.
Yeah.
So those are a couple things that stand out, like empathy. I think for so long, creatives were just named creative directors because they were good creatives. And I hope it's changing, that you're more a manager of people, helping people do their best creative work.
Yeah. I think it's probably changing a bit because I think these conversations are happening a bit more. But I think we could be a lot better at it. And I think part of that is just continuing to expand the reach of these conversations and getting people to just like bake it into the evaluation process. Like, is this person, developing leadership skills, demonstrating leadership skills, and how can I encourage that and help them develop it more? Back to, creative development. It's not just the creative development on how to be a better writer or art director, but like, this person seems to have a little bit of a thing for kind of taking the lead when a project needs to happen. What can I do to help them further those skills? And maybe even ask them, hey, do you like leading? It looks like you do, but do you like it? And is that a path that you want? And then I think the parallel question becomes, how can agencies get better at creating another path for really good creators to have a way to make a little more money and take on responsibility in a different way, not for people, but to be sort of like the in-house expert. You know what I mean? Like I don't manage a team, but damn it, you show up at my desk, I'm going to give you a lot of information on how to create great headlines or on how to, find, really interesting insights or whatever. And that's valuable in a different way, but a quantifiable way. You have somebody who can do that. Of course, your whole team's going to be better, even if that person never manages another human being, because that's not what they want to do, nor should they be doing. So I think we struggle with that. And then we say we're going to reward this amazing art director with a creative director job where they become either just a highly paid art director, but then they're responsible for 10 people who they ignore, or they become they try to manage those people, but they're micromanaging because they're still thinking like a creative and trying to get into the work instead of trying to connect to the people who do the work, which is it's a different skill set. I do think it requires creativity.
100%.
In a big
I think
way.
it's like you say, the quantifiable. Like we need to turn the creativity inwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, how do we reinvent this business, like to serve clients? So like the one I mentioned earlier who said, I hate ad agencies and built their own in-house team.
Yeah.
Like that's not a one-off.
No.
We are so capable, but it's like, how do we get creative with process? How do we get creative with tech? How do we get creative with branding ourselves?
Yeah.
And not just finding another word for creativity to brand ourselves.
Yeah.
What is it beyond that? Because when you can't quantify how you do what you do, you can't quantify your process, you can't quantify anything.
Right.
Well, how do you bill from that
Right.
standpoint? It's so gray. And then as a freelancer too, how do you bill? Well, I guess we'll just do hourly and this general rate.
Right.
I don't know how much anything should like none of us seem to know how much we're worth.
No,
Like,
which is such a
it
shame
comes
because
it comes down to this like vagueness, this fear of structure or the cheating, all the things we talked about. Like we're too proud to admit that structure and quantifying can help creativity. It's not like I use this example. I'm going to send it to you after to see if it makes sense, because I sent it to one person and he was like, no.
Okay.
And usually that's enough to stop me.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, that I'm a Mac, I'm a PC.
Sure.
The old ads, I have an image of them standing apart, and then I have one of them standing together holding hands. I'm like, if you want to increase your speed and confidence, it's this. It's like together, left and right brain, not apart. And I think agencies are too siloed and they don't provide a good enough service because of that. And it's damaging internally for people too, because creatives stay in their world, account people stay here. They talk to the client. Everything is separate, and it actually becomes divisive, and you're just having to fight a lot. Not at all agencies, but at a lot of them. It's exhausting. It's exhausting.
I personally really like that visual. And I get why people don't like it, honestly, because that advertising worked so well. That advertising worked so well to connect me as a creative to the identity of I'm a Mac, and to have such a disdain for this goofball, aloof, I'm a PC guy, that why would I ever want to join hands with that? Like, and that is just baked into the DNA of a lot of agencies, even ones that are quite creative, and therefore you get people to go, I don't want to learn about the business. I don't want to understand what structures are in place. I don't want to understand how to quantify the value of what I do, and therefore be able to tell you, like, actually, this is worth $10,000. You know, you want it's worth 10. I know it's worth 10. I can show you why it's worth 10. That ends up scaring us because it's a threat to our identity as this kind of free form creative person, as opposed to, I am a structured, process-driven creative who embraces all of that because it actually unlocks all of the good, goofy stuff that's inside my brain.
Yeah.
Rather than relying on the whims of the universe to unlock it one particular Tuesday every other month. You know?
Yeah. I think fast forward into the future like this, it's going to be so rare where we're like the way we used to do it is it's inevitable.
Yeah.
Look at the tech world and all around us, and with like minimum viable product versus overthinking things. Like it's the only way to keep up. How do you come up with better ideas faster? Yeah. Because we just don't have the time, and there's so many different platforms, and we just have to think differently. We have to speed it up a bit. I mean, look at, obviously, ChatGPT or AI is ridiculously fast. Sure. Not very good creatively. But you know what? We gotta, I say this, AI needs to be more human. I think humans need to be more robotic. Now we approach things or AI needs to be more emotional. Humans need to be a bit more logical with how we create. Not completely, but we need more logic.
But we can blend those things a little more.
It will help us.
It's interesting as you say this. One of the things I do typically is ask the previous guest, ask a question of the next guest, and so on. And the question that was from our last guest, which is a woman, Katie McDonald, a wonderful guest who is this brilliant coach, works with a lot of CEOs and people at that level who are dealing with a lot of stress. But one of the questions that came up for her was thinking about you was, how do you define creativity? I feel like you're starting to do that, but is there anything more that we're missing that we've kind of already covered here?
I mean, I'm going to say something that's been said a million times, but in my own words, and maybe it hits a bit differently. I think if any of us are asked to define creativity, we often will say, I think it was like Steve Jobs who said, he got it from someone else in his own words, was it's two ideas coming together to create something new. And I was like, okay, I get that, but it never once helped me solve a creative problem. And so I started to think about it. And I realized that it's usually like two unrelated things coming together to create something new. Like too often we think too linearly creatively, like Wi-Fi is fast, but when you introduce something else, I noticed it when I was doing that exercise to write headlines for my course using opposites.
Yeah.
I got to a point where it's like literally anything that would happen. My kids were going to the pool and I wrote, what was it? Go from drowning in doubt to swimming in headlines. It was like, I could do it with anything. If they went to a farm, I would have found a way.
Yeah.
And I was like, then because it's always so easy as a creative to do like sponsorship ads because it's like football and McDonald's comes together and you're like, you start to get ideas.
Yeah.
But so I think that's what creativity is finding connections between two unrelated things.
I like that. And I like the practicalness of it as well, because your brain immediately can start to think that way. So yeah, I love that. It feels very in line with how you're approaching everything you're doing, right? It's like you're finding a way to make it useful, not just sort of theoretical, which I love. Building off of that, we've got a guest coming up next week, Zoe Dalton, and she's got this really interesting career. She does kind of recruitment consulting kind of stuff in the healthcare space. She also is, certified as a life insurance agent, but she's an entrepreneur, and she's very driven by, about things like leadership and personal development. And I'm looking forward to having her on the show. And I'd love to, if you've got something for her, ask her a question from you as well.
It's funny, you sent me a link to her profile and I read it, and her story is just amazing of what she went through personally. And I know she has 2 sons, and I have a son. And so this is kind of, the question for me was like so on point. It was like teed up, like I had that answer. And I didn't know that question. This one isn't for what she does. I know that Zoe does a lot of things, but I guess as a father, and I know her kids are a bit older than mine, I'm just curious about like the best parenting advice she's received or what she'd pass on. I find that stuff applies to a lot of life. So I'd be curious as to what she says to that.
Yeah, I think that'll be really interesting. Yeah, her story is a very interesting, fascinating, and inspiring one. And I think it all does connect to her relationship with her kids and all that stuff. So let's see what she has to say. I think it'll be fun.
Might catch her off guard. Apologize to her.
Oh, no, it's all good. I think everybody, I at least let people know that this is coming a little bit so they can be prepared for something a little different.
Okay.
So, a few wrap-up questions before we go here. One, I feel like we've answered it in many ways through what we've talked about here, but if there's more to add, if you could wave a magic wand and just kind of take the suck out of work, fully desuckify it, what does that world look like?
I think just the word work itself doesn't feel very good. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it would just feel good, like not feel like something you have to do. There'd just be more joy and like growth attached to it. I think we accept that it's supposed to be shittier than it has to be. You know what I mean? So for me, it's like there's more freedom and joy. Yeah, life's hard for sure, and it always will be, but there needs to be more like just freedom and joy. And for me, that looks like making a living from wherever I am, having products that earn passive income, where I'm being helpful, and connecting with like cool and wonderful people.
So interesting as you say that. I just think, like, what would a better word be, for what we bring into the world, the value we bring into the world through the stuff we create and do. I mean, the act of creation is certainly a part of it. That seems more open and inviting, but it might be just a fun exercise at some point to think like, what words or phrases could we use to describe the things we do to sort of earn a living that invite us into it, as opposed to putting this kind of wall around it that goes, I gotta go into that again,
Yeah, it's like if you feel what the word work means, just feel it, and then you feel what the word play means.
Yeah.
How different are they? Sometimes we can play as creatives in advertising, but how do you get more play into your work?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important. One of the last things I will ask, and I've asked everybody this so far, I use a lot of sound effects on the show. I'm a cat guy, so I put cat sounds mixed in with a few others in the intro and outro of every show, but I also always will include a sound that the guest creates. So do you have a desuckified sound you're willing to add to our library?
Yeah, I kind of want to do this one. I'm going to put my thumb to my nose. That's to all the bad work over these experiences. This is what creating is. I feel like I'm doing by creating for myself now.
I think that's pretty awesome. I think it's a fun way of giving ourselves permission to redefine what work means to us.
Yeah, I guess it's also playful. It's just a kid would do. Kids do that.
Yeah, I'm all on board for being playful and goofy and silly and all those things. So I think that's super fun. Well, before we go, I obviously want to give people the chance to figure out how to find you online. So what are the best ways to track you down and learn more about all the awesome stuff you're doing, Dan?
Yeah, I think it's mostly LinkedIn. So just send me a connection request on LinkedIn. Can follow if you want, but just connect. And my newsletter is nelkencreative.com.
Okay.
You can sign up to that for once a week or once every 2 weeks. I share a little something. Well,
I highly recommend people do both of those things because you're a wonderful person to follow on LinkedIn. You put a lot of great content that's both insightful and kind of gets you thinking, but then it always does seem to have a tangible takeaway to it that I can go, I can start benefiting from this in 2 minutes as opposed to having to keep it up here. So I love that. And then your newsletter is kind of more of that. And then obviously you go to your site and you can learn about your course and, people can learn about your book and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, they connect with me. I will try and sell them on something at some point. I don't need to do it here. Yeah. If you find it helpful, it's helping me. And that's why the stuff that I create, it's the help I needed. I didn't want more theory, like you're saying, TJ. I needed help in the next 2 minutes. So that's what I try and do.
Awesome. Well, what's next for you, Dan? Anything on the horizon that you can share with us?
Yep. There's currently a wait list of over 800 people. I haven't mentioned it in a little while because I have some other things I'm doing. That wait list is tentatively called the Creative Creator Network. And so the next thing I'm launching is the other half of this. There's a lot of what I'm doing is creating within advertising and marketing, and this is creating outside of it for yourself. So it's a lot of what we discussed on here, but a bit more practical. So to help people bring more of the ideas in their head kind of out into the world and start making stuff.
That's awesome. I love that and look forward to it. Well, Dan, thanks for coming on. This was a really fun discussion and a needed discussion. I think bringing value and I think the practicalness of a lot of what you do, it creates hope in a way that's a little more right here, as opposed to someday we'll be better as an industry. It's no, we can do these 5 things tomorrow and already be better, at least personally, if not as a business. So I really appreciate that. And I hope more people get to check out what you're doing.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting me to be on the show and for bringing this out of me and allowing me to share it. I really appreciate what you do too.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. We'll talk soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. And a huge thanks to Dan for bringing insight, wit, and a practical brilliance to the show. If you enjoyed the episode, please share, rate, review, subscribe, or consider starting a booty short company called DesuckifyTwerk and creating a co-branding opportunity where we put our logo on one cheek and your logo on the other. You can follow Dan on LinkedIn and check out his site at nelkencreative.com. You can learn about his courses, his speaking offerings, and his amazing book, A Self-Help Guide for Copywriters, which is really a self-help guide for people who like to think. I like to think my site and my Substack newsletter are pretty nifty too. I'm on a mission to make work suck less, and I'd love for you to join me. Want to make that desuckification happen ASAP? Let's set up a free half-hour strategy session. Bye, everyone.